Right now, you think you're listening to these words. You think you're sitting somewhere, holding a phone, staring at a screen. You think the world around you is real, solid, objective. But what if none of that is true? What if every sight, every sound, and every sensation is just a convenient fiction? This isn't philosophy, it's actual science. Evolution didn't give you a window into the world, it gave you a user interface. A headset you were born wearing, and you've never seen what's actually out there, not even once. Tonight we strip away the interface, settle in, because once you see the code, you can never go back. The possibility that reality itself is the greatest illusion you've ever experienced, and that you right now are the one creating it. Let's start with something simple, something you've probably never noticed about your own vision. Right now, as you're listening to this, you have a blind spot in each of your eyes, a literal gap in your vision where you can't see anything at all. It's the place where your optic nerve connects to your retina. There are no photoreceptors there, no cells to detect light, just a hole. If you want to experience this for yourself, try this. Look at something in the room with you. Maybe a lamp, or a picture on the wall, or the corner where the ceiling meets the walls. Focus on it with both eyes. Now close your left eye and keep staring at that spot. Without moving your right eye from that spot, pay attention to your peripheral vision, the edges of what you can see. There's a region slightly to the left of where you're looking, where objects seem to disappear. Not fade, disappear. That's your blind spot. But here's what's strange. Right now, as you look around the room with both eyes open, you don't see a hole floating in your field of view. You don't see a dark spot or a missing piece. Your vision feels complete, seamless, uninterrupted. So what's happening? Your brain is filling it in. It's taking the colours and patterns from the surrounding area and painting over the gap. Inventing content, creating something that isn't there. And it does this so smoothly, so effortlessly, that you've gone your entire life without noticing. You've been walking around with a significant blind spot in each eye, and your brain has been quietly editing your perception of reality to hide it from you. This isn't a metaphor, this is neuroscience. Your brain is not showing you the world as it is. It's showing you a version of the world that's been edited, filtered, and in many cases completely fabricated. And the blind spot is just the beginning. Consider what happens when you move your eyes. Right now, try it. Look at one corner of the room, then quickly shift your gaze to another corner. It feels smooth, doesn't it? Like your vision is continuous, but it's not. Every time your eyes move, and they move constantly, about 3 to 4 times every second, you go temporarily blind. These rapid eye movements, called saccades, happen so fast that the image on your retina becomes a useless blur. Your brain can't process it, so it simply doesn't show it to you. Instead, it edits out the blur entirely and stitches your visual field back together, creating the illusion of smooth, uninterrupted vision. You experience a seamless world not because the world is seamless, but because your brain is an extraordinarily good editor. It cuts out the parts that don't work and fills in the gaps with predictions, assumptions, and sometimes pure invention. And you never notice the seams. Now think about colour. You see a red apple. The apple is red, right? That's a property of the apple, except it's not. Colour doesn't exist in the world, not in the way you experience it. What exists in the world are photons, packets of electromagnetic radiation bouncing off surfaces at different wavelengths. Your eyes detect some of those wavelengths, the narrow band we call visible light, and your brain interprets them as colours. But colour itself is a creation of your mind. It's a label, a category your brain invented to help you distinguish between different wavelengths of light. And not everyone's brain creates the same colours. People with colour blindness see the world in a different palette. Some animals see colours humans can't even imagine. Bees, for example, can see ultraviolet light. They perceive patterns on flowers that are completely invisible to you. To a bee, a flower that looks plain white to you might be covered in intricate designs, glowing in colours you've never seen and never will. So what colour is the flower, really? Is it the white you see, or the ultraviolet pattern the bee sees? The answer is neither, or both. The flower isn't any colour. It's just reflecting wavelengths of light. Colour is something your brain adds to make sense of that information. And different brains add different colours. For most of human history, we assumed our senses were showing us the world as it really is. We see a tree, there's a tree. We see a table, there's a table. Simple. Obvious. Except it's not. A cognitive scientist at the University of California, Irvine, named Donald Hoffman, has spent decades proving mathematically that this assumption is wrong. Dead wrong. And not just slightly wrong, completely, fundamentally wrong. Hoffman isn't a fringe theorist. He's published dozens of peer-reviewed papers in top scientific journals. He's taught at one of the world's leading research universities for over 30 years. He's worked with mathematicians, physicists, and evolutionary biologists to test his ideas rigorously, and his conclusion is startling. Evolution, he argues, did not shape your senses to show you the truth. It shaped them to keep you alive long enough to reproduce. And those two goals, survival and truth, are not the same thing. In fact, they're often opposites. Seeing the truth, processing reality as it actually is, takes too much time and too much energy. Your brain consumes about 20% of your body's energy, and a huge portion of that goes to processing sensory information. So evolution gave you something else instead. A simplified interface. A user-friendly version of reality. One that's easy to navigate but completely, utterly unlike what's actually out there. According to Hoffman's mathematical models, the probability that any organism, including humans, perceives objective reality accurately is 0. Not low. 0. Think about what that means. You've spent your entire life assuming that what you see is real, that the world you perceive is the world that exists. But according to the mathematics of evolution, that's impossible. No organism that sees the truth can compete with an organism that sees only what it needs to survive. Truth is expensive. Survival is cheap. And in the game of evolution, cheap wins every time. Hoffman uses the metaphor of a computer desktop. When you look at your computer screen, you see icons, a little trash can, a folder, a document. You click on the trash can icon, and files are deleted. You click on a folder and it opens. The icons are useful. They let you interact with the computer without needing to understand what's actually happening inside the machine. But the icons are not the reality. Inside the computer, there's no little trash can. There are no folders. There's just a series of electrical signals, ones and zeros, voltage changes in silicon chips. The desktop interface hides all of that complexity from you. It gives you a simplified version, one that's easy to use but utterly unlike the underlying reality. And that, Hoffman argues, is exactly what your senses are doing. They're giving you a desktop interface for reality, a set of icons that let you navigate the world without needing to process the overwhelming, incomprehensible complexity of what's actually out there. The table in front of you, that's an icon. The cup you're holding, another icon. Your own body, an icon. None of these things are what they appear to be. They're simplified representations, user-friendly symbols that evolution designed to help you survive. And just like the trash can, icon on your computer doesn't look anything like the actual process of deleting files. The objects you perceive don't look anything like the reality they represent. This isn't just speculation. Hoffman and his colleagues have run computer simulations to test this idea. They created virtual worlds with artificial organisms competing for resources. Some organisms could see the true state of the world. Others could only see a simplified interface, something that showed them just enough information to find food and avoid danger, but nothing more. The researchers ran these simulations thousands of times under a wide range of conditions, and every time the same thing happened. The organisms that saw the truth went extinct. They couldn't compete. Seeing the truth was too slow, too costly. The organisms with the simplified interface, the ones that saw only what they needed to survive, won every time, and it wasn't even close. So what does this mean for you? It means that every assumption you've ever made about the nature of reality is wrong. You think you're seeing the world, you're not. You're seeing a cartoon. a highly edited, simplified, and in many cases entirely fictional representation designed by evolution to keep you alive, not to show you the truth. And this isn't just true for vision, it's true for all your senses. Sound, for example, you hear a dog barking, but sound doesn't exist in the world. What exists in the world are pressure waves, molecules of air pushing against each other in rhythmic patterns. Those pressure waves reach your ears, vibrate your eardrums, and get translated into electrical signals that travel to your brain. Your brain then interprets those signals as sound. The bark you hear is a creation of your mind. And just like with colour, not everyone hears the same sounds. Some people can hear higher frequencies than others. Some, animals like bats, hear frequencies that are completely inaudible to you. Bats navigate the world using echolocation, sending out high-frequency sound waves and listening to the echoes that bounce back. To a bat, the world is a landscape of sound. It hears shapes. It hears distances. It perceives reality in a way that's so foreign to your experience that you can't even imagine it. And yet, the bat's perception is just as valid as yours, maybe more so. After all, bats have been around for 50 million years. They're extraordinarily successful creatures, and they see, or rather hear, a version of reality that you will never access. This is true across the animal kingdom. Every species perceives reality differently. Some fish can detect electrical fields. They sense the bioelectric signatures of other creatures, navigating and hunting in complete darkness, using a sense you don't have and can't comprehend. Some birds can see the Earth's magnetic field. They perceive invisible lines of force stretching across the planet, using them to navigate thousands of miles during migration. You walk through the same world as these creatures, but you're effectively living in different realities. The world a bee experiences is not the world you experience. The world a bat experiences is not the world you experience. So which version is real? The answer, according to Hoffman and a growing number of scientists and philosophers, is none of them, or all of them. There is no single objective reality that all these creatures are perceiving in different ways. Instead, each species has its own interface, its own desktop, shaped by evolution to show it only what it needs to survive, and that includes you. You're not special, you're not closer to the truth than a bat, or a bee, or a fish. You're just using a different interface, one designed for a creature that walks upright, uses tools, and lives in social groups. Your interface shows you objects, colours, shapes, sounds, but none of those things are real, not in the way you think they are. They're icons, symbols, placeholders for something far more complex and strange. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but surely some of what I see is real. The table is solid, I can touch it, I can put things on it, it holds weight. How can that not be real? But even solidity is an illusion. The table feels solid because the electrons in your hand repel the electrons in the table. It's an electromagnetic force. But the table itself is mostly empty space. If you zoomed in far enough, you'd see atoms. And atoms are almost entirely empty. The nucleus of an atom is incredibly small. If an atom were the size of a football stadium, the nucleus would be the size of a pea sitting at the centre. Everything else is just empty space with a few electrons buzzing around. So when you touch the table, you're not actually touching anything. Your hand is hovering a tiny distance above the table's surface, held apart by electromagnetic forces. The sensation of solidity is your brain's interpretation of those forces. It's a useful interpretation. It helps you interact with the world, but it's not the truth. The truth is far stranger, and this gets even weirder when you consider quantum mechanics. At the smallest scales, particles don't even have definite positions or properties until they're observed. Before you look at something, before you measure it, it exists in a superposition of all possible states. It's not here or there. It's both, or neither. It's a cloud of probabilities. And somehow, the act of observation collapses that cloud into a single outcome. This is not philosophy, this is physics. It's been tested and confirmed thousands of times, and no one really understands why it works this way. So the table in front of you doesn't just look different than it really is. It might not even exist in any definite form until you look at it, and once you stop looking, it returns to a haze of probabilities. Now, most physicists will tell you not to take this interpretation too literally. They'll say, quantum mechanics applies to particles, not everyday objects like tables. And they're probably right. But the point is, the deeper you look into the nature of reality, the more it falls apart. The more it reveals itself to be something utterly unlike your everyday experience. And your brain hides all of this from you. It has to. If you perceived reality as it actually is, as a chaotic, incomprehensible storm of electromagnetic fields, quantum probabilities, and subatomic particles, you wouldn't be able to function. You'd be paralyzed, overwhelmed. So your brain does you a favor. It simplifies. It creates a stable, predictable world of objects and colors and sounds, a world you can navigate, a world that makes sense, but it's a fiction, a beautiful, convincing, extraordinarily useful fiction, but a fiction nonetheless. And here's the thing, your brain doesn't just simplify reality, it also fills in massive amounts of missing information. Most of what you think you're seeing, you're not actually seeing, you're predicting. Your brain is constantly running simulations, making guesses about what should be there based on past experience. And most of the time, it's right, but not always. Consider the phenomenon of change blindness. Researchers have done experiments where they show people two nearly identical images, alternating back and forth. There's a difference between the images, sometimes a significant one, a missing object, a change in colour, but because the change happens during a brief flicker, during a moment when attention is divided, people often don't notice it, even after looking at the images for several minutes. Even when the change is right in front of them, their brains assume the scene is stable, so they don't update their internal model. They keep seeing what they expect to see, not what's actually there. This happens in real life too. You've probably had the experience of looking for something, searching everywhere, only to find it sitting in plain sight, right where you looked 5 times already. Why didn't you see it? Because your brain wasn't expecting it to be there, so it didn't register. Your perception is not a passive recording of reality, it's an active process, a constant construction, and that construction is based far more on expectation than on raw sensory input. In fact, some neuroscientists believe that perception is mostly prediction, that your brain is not waiting for sensory information to come in and then processing it. Instead, it's constantly generating predictions about what it expects to see, hear, and feel, and it only updates those predictions when the incoming data doesn't match. This is called predictive coding, and it explains a lot. It explains why optical illusions work. Your brain makes a prediction based on past experience, and the illusion exploits that prediction. It explains why you can walk into a familiar room in the dark and know where everything is. Your brain has a model of that room. It doesn't need to see it, it already knows, or thinks it knows. It explains why time seems to speed up as you get older. When you're young, everything is new. Your brain is constantly updating its models, processing new information, but as you age, more and more of your experience becomes familiar. Your brain stops paying attention. It just runs on autopilot, relying on predictions. And subjectively, time seems to pass more quickly, because you're not encoding as many new memories. So in a very real sense, you're not experiencing the present moment. You're experiencing your brain's prediction of the present moment. And most of the time, that prediction is based on the past. You're living in a simulation, not a computer simulation, though that's another theory entirely, but a simulation generated by your own brain, one that's cobbled together from fragments of sensory data, memories, expectations, and guesses. And the vast majority of what you think you're perceiving is actually something your brain invented. Now, if all of this is true, if your senses are not showing you reality, if your brain is constantly constructing a simplified, fictionalized version of the world, then what is reality? What's actually out there behind the interface? This is where things get truly strange. Because according to Hoffman and others, whatever reality is, it's nothing like what you perceive. Not even close, not even in the same ballpark. Hoffman argues that space-time itself, the 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time that seem so fundamental to your experience, are part of the interface. They're not real, they're just part of the desktop, useful for navigation, but not reflective of the underlying reality. He points to modern physics as evidence. Einstein's theory of relativity already tells us that space and time are not absolute, they're relative, They bend and warp depending on gravity and velocity. And quantum mechanics tells us that at the smallest scales, space-time breaks down entirely. There's a limit, called the Planck length, about 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, where the very concept of space stops making sense. Below that scale, the equations fall apart. Similarly, there's a Planck time, about 10 to the minus 43 seconds, where the concept of time becomes meaningless. So space-time, the arena in which you think everything happens, is not fundamental. It's not the deepest level of reality. It's something that emerges, something constructed. And if space-time is part of the interface, then everything inside space-time, every object, every event, every experience, is also part of the interface, which means that whatever reality actually is, it exists outside of space and time entirely. This is not easy to wrap your mind around, and that's the point. Your brain evolved to navigate a world of objects in space and time. It's not equipped to understand a reality that transcends space and time. It would be like asking a character in a video game to understand the computer running the game. The character exists inside the game world. It has no access to the hardware, the code, the programmer. All it knows is the game, and that's you. You're the character. You exist inside the interface, and the reality outside the interface, the reality that's actually generating this whole experience, is completely beyond your comprehension. But that doesn't mean it's not there. In fact, it's the only thing that is there. Everything else, everything you see and touch and experience, is just the interface, just the desktop, just icons on a screen. And here's the truly unsettling part. If this is true, and the evidence suggests it is, then you've never seen reality. Not even once. You've spent your entire life inside a simulation, a hallucination, a dream generated by your brain, and you have no way of knowing what's outside that dream. You can't step outside your own perception. You can't take off the headset. At least not while you're alive. You're trapped inside the interface, and the interface is all you've ever known. But this raises a question. If you're not seeing reality, if everything is just an interface, then what are you? Are you real, or are you just another icon, another part of the simulation? Hoffman has an answer to this, but it's not one that most people are prepared to hear, and it's not one that fits neatly into the way you've been taught to think about yourself. Because if reality is not what it seems, then neither are you. Your body, your brain, your entire sense of self might be nothing more than another convenient fiction, another icon on the desktop, useful for navigating the game of life, but not real, not in any ultimate sense. And if that's true, then the question becomes, what are you really? What exists behind the icon of your body, your thoughts, your personality? What is the reality that's generating this experience of being you? These are the questions we'll explore as we go deeper. But for now, just sit with this. The world you're perceiving right now, the room around you, the sounds you're hearing, the weight of your body in the chair, none of it is real. Not in the way you think. It's a construct, a model, a best guess generated by a brain that's optimized for survival, not truth. And you've been living inside that construct your entire life, never once glimpsing what lies beyond it, until now. So if what you're perceiving is just an interface, just a simplified, user-friendly version of reality, then the natural question is, what would a better metaphor be? How should you think about this? Hoffman uses a specific term. He calls it a headset, like a virtual reality headset. Imagine you're born wearing a VR headset. You've never taken it off. You don't even know it's there. Everything you see, everything you experience, is being generated by that headset. The world inside the headset feels real. It has objects, colours, sounds, physical laws. You can interact with it, you can move through it, but it's not the real world. It's a simulation, a rendered environment. And outside the headset, there's a completely different reality. One that doesn't look anything like what you're experiencing. Now, most people hear this and think of science fiction, the Matrix, simulation theory, the idea that we're living in a computer program created by some advanced civilization. But that's not what Hoffman is saying. He's not saying there's a programmer. He's not saying there's a computer running the simulation. He's saying that your brain is the headset. Your senses are the inputs. and the reality you experience, the world of objects in space and time, is the rendering. It's what your brain generates to help you navigate, but it's not what's actually out there. Think about the video game Grand Theft Auto. When you play the game, you see a city, streets, cars, buildings, people. It all looks real, or at least real enough. You can drive around, you can interact with the world. The game has rules, physics, cause and effect. And while you're playing, you take it seriously. You try not to crash your car. You follow the roads. You react to what you see. But if you're the programmer who wrote the game, you know something the player doesn't. You know that the city isn't real. There are no streets, there are no cars. There's just code, millions of lines of instructions running on a computer, toggling voltages in silicon chips. When the player turns the steering wheel, they think they're turning a car. But really, they're triggering a sequence of electrical signals that update variables in the code. The car doesn't exist, the street doesn't exist. The entire world of the game is a rendered illusion, a convenient interface that lets the player interact with the underlying system without needing to understand how it works. And that's what your reality is. You're the player. You see streets and cars and buildings, but those are just renderings, convenient symbols. Behind them is something utterly unlike what you're perceiving. Something that doesn't have streets or cars or buildings. Something that might not even have space or time. Now, this metaphor has a profound implication. If you're inside a headset, if the world you perceive is just a rendering, then the objects you see don't exist when you're not looking at them. In Grand Theft Auto, the game doesn't render the entire city all the time. That would be a waste of computational resources. Instead, it only renders what's on your screen. If you're looking at a red Mustang, the game generates that car, puts it in your field of view, and lets you interact with it. But the moment you look away, the Mustang stops existing. The game doesn't keep it there. It doesn't need to. It only exists when you're looking, and if you turn around and look again, the game renders it again. To you it seems like the car was there the whole time, but it wasn't. It was only there when the game needed it to be. And Hoffman argues that this is exactly how your reality works. The table in front of you exists because you're looking at it. Your brain is rendering it. But when you look away, it stops existing. Not in some abstract philosophical sense, actually stops existing. There's no table when you're not perceiving it. There's just something else, some deeper reality that your brain translates into the experience of a table when you look. But the table itself, the solid brown wooden object you think is sitting there, that's just the rendering. It's just the icon. And icons only exist when they're needed. You might object. You might say, but I can look away from the table and then look back and it's still there. Same table, same position. That proves it exists even when I'm not looking. But does it? Or does it just prove that your brain is very good at creating a consistent simulation? Think about it. When you look away from the table, you have no evidence that it continues to exist. You're not perceiving it. You're not interacting with it. For all you know, it vanishes the moment your attention leaves it, and when you look back, your brain simply regenerates it in the same place, with the same properties, because that's what makes the simulation consistent. That's what makes it useful. If objects randomly changed or disappeared, the interface would be useless. You couldn't navigate, you couldn't plan, you couldn't survive, so your brain evolved to create a stable, predictable world. But stability doesn't mean reality, it just means good programming. Now, you might say, okay, but what about other people? If I look away from the table, someone else can still see it, so it must exist. But here's the thing, that other person is also rendering the table. They're also inside their own headset. And their rendering is separate from yours. They're not seeing your table, they're seeing their table. And the two tables seem to match because both of your brains are using similar interfaces, shaped by the same evolutionary pressures. But they're not the same table. There is no shared table sitting out there in objective reality. There are just two separate renderings, two separate icons, generated by two separate brains. This is where things start to get really strange, because if everyone is inside their own headset, rendering their own version of reality, then what's connecting them? What makes it seem like we're all inhabiting the same world? Hoffman's answer is that there is something underlying all of this, some deeper reality that all of our headsets are translating. But that deeper reality is not made of objects in space and time. It's something else entirely. And the headsets, the interfaces we use to perceive it, are just different ways of interacting with that underlying something. Think of it like this. Imagine there's a website. One person accesses it on their phone. Another person accesses it on their laptop. The phone displays the website in a small screen with a touch interface. The laptop displays it on a larger screen with a mouse and keyboard. The two experiences look different. They feel different, but they're both accessing the same underlying data, the same information. The website itself, the actual data sitting on a server somewhere, doesn't look like either display. It's just code, ones and zeros. But the phone and the laptop translate that code into visual representations that humans can interact with, and that's what your senses are doing. They're translating some deeper reality, some underlying information, into a visual, auditory, tactile representation, and my senses are doing the same thing. We're accessing the same underlying data, but we're each rendering it in our own headsets. So it seems like we're in the same world, but really, we're just translating the same source into similar experiences. Now, let's push this further. If the objects you see are just renderings, just icons, then what about your body? Your body exists in space and time. You can see it, you can touch it. It feels undeniably real. But if space and time are part of the interface, then your body is also part of the interface. It's another icon, a particularly important one, sure. It's the avatar you use to navigate the simulation. But it's not you, not really. Your body is a tool, a character in the game, and just like the red Mustang in Grand Theft Auto, it only exists when it's being rendered. When you look down at your hand, your brain generates the experience of a hand. Skin, fingers, nails. It feels solid. It moves when you will it to move. But that hand is not a physical object out there in objective reality. It's a rendering, an icon. And when you're not looking at it, when you're not thinking about it, it stops existing in the same way the table stops existing. Now, this might sound absurd. Of course your hand exists even when you're not looking at it. You can feel it, you can move it, but can you? Or are you just experiencing the rendering of a hand when your brain decides to generate that experience? After all, you don't feel your hand most of the time. Right now, before I mentioned it, you probably weren't aware of the sensation of your hand touching something, or the weight of your arms, or the feeling of your clothes on your skin. Those sensations weren't part of your conscious experience. They only appeared when I directed your attention to them. So where were they before? Were they happening in the background, unnoticed, or did your brain only generate them when you looked? The answer is, you can't know. You have no way of accessing your experience when you're not paying attention to it. The only thing you can be sure of is what you're experiencing right now, in this moment. And even that, as we've discussed, is a rendering, a simulation, not the thing itself. So your body, this thing you've identified with your entire life, this thing you think of as you, is just another part of the interface, another icon on the desktop. And here's where it gets even stranger. If your body is just an icon, then what about your brain? Neuroscientists will tell you that your brain is the source of your consciousness, that your thoughts, your feelings, your perceptions all arise from neural activity. Neurons firing in specific patterns, chemicals being released, electrical signals propagating through networks of cells. And there's a lot of evidence for this. When certain parts of the brain are damaged, specific abilities are lost. When you take drugs that alter brain chemistry, your perception changes. Brain scans show activity correlated with different mental states, so it seems obvious. The brain creates consciousness, but Hoffman says no. The brain doesn't create consciousness. Consciousness creates the brain. Because the brain, like everything else you perceive, is part of the interface. It's another icon. When neuroscientists open up a skull and look inside, what they see is a brain. Folded grey matter, blood vessels, electrical activity. But that's just the rendering. That's what consciousness looks like. When you point the interface inward, the brain is not the source, it's the symbol. It's the icon your consciousness generates to represent the process by which it's creating this entire simulation. Think about it. You don't have a brain right now. Not really. You've never seen your own brain, you've never touched it. You've only seen pictures of brains or models, or maybe you've seen someone else's brain in a medical context. But your brain, you're taking it on faith that it's there, and even if a surgeon were to open your skull right now and show you your brain in a mirror, all you'd be seeing is a rendering, your visual system generating the experience of a brain. But the brain itself, the supposed physical object that's generating your consciousness, is just part of the simulation. It's part of the desktop. And the real you, the consciousness that's generating all of this, exists outside the desktop entirely. This is a complete inversion of how you've been taught to think. You've been told that you are your brain. That consciousness is an emergent property of complex neural activity. That when your brain dies, you cease to exist. But if Hoffman is right, it's the other way around. You are not your brain. Your brain is something you create. It's a tool, an icon, a way of representing, within the interface, the process by which consciousness is constructing this experience. And when the brain dies, when the body dies, all that happens is the interface shuts down. The headset comes off. But you, the consciousness that was generating the experience, you don't die. You were never inside the headset to begin with. Now, this raises an obvious question. If consciousness is not generated by the brain, then where does it come from? What is it? And this is where Hoffman's theory moves into territory that sounds almost spiritual, though he approaches it from a purely scientific and mathematical perspective. He argues that consciousness is fundamental. It's not something that emerges from matter. Matter, or at least what we perceive as matter, emerges from consciousness. Consciousness is the ground of reality. It's the thing that actually exists. And everything else, space, time, particles, forces, brains, bodies, tables, trees, all of it is just consciousness, looking at itself through different interfaces, different headsets. This is a radical idea, but it's not new. Philosophers and mystics have been saying something similar for thousands of years. The idea that the material world is illusion, that consciousness is the only reality, appears in Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and even in some interpretations of Christianity and Islam. What's new is that Hoffman is trying to build a rigorous mathematical framework for it. He's not asking you to take it on faith. He's showing, through equations and models and simulations, that this view of reality is not only possible, but necessary to explain what we observe. And if consciousness is fundamental, if it's the thing that's actually real, then you are not a body with consciousness. You are consciousness with a body. Or more accurately, you are consciousness generating the experience of having a body. The body is a character, an avatar, a way for consciousness to interact with the interface. And when you die, when the body stops functioning, the avatar disappears. But the consciousness, the thing that was playing the character, remains. It's still there. It was never dependent on the body was dependent on it. This has profound implications. It means that death is not the end. Not in the sense of some supernatural afterlife, though it doesn't rule that out, but in the sense that the thing you really are, the consciousness that's been generating this entire experience, doesn't cease to exist when the body fails. It just stops rendering that particular interface. It takes off that particular headset. And what happens next? Hoffman doesn't claim to know, but he speculates that consciousness might take on another form, another interface, another headset, another life, or it might return to its natural state, whatever that is, outside of space and time entirely. The point is, you're not trapped in this body, you're not confined to this one life, you're something far larger, far more fundamental, temporarily experiencing reality through this narrow, limited perspective. But let's bring this back to something more immediate, something you can test right now. If the world you perceive is just a rendering, just a headset, then it should be possible to catch the system in the act, to see the glitches, the moments where the interface breaks down. And it turns out you can. Optical illusions are one example. They work because they exploit the assumptions your brain makes when rendering the world. The Müller-Lyer illusion, for instance, shows two lines of equal length, but one looks longer than the other because of the arrows at the ends. Your brain interprets the arrows as depth cues, like the corners of a room, and adjust the perceived length of the lines accordingly. Even when you know the lines are the same length, even when you measure them, they still look different. The illusion persists because your brain can't stop rendering the scene according to its assumptions. It's locked into the interface. Another example is the rubber hand illusion. In this experiment, a person's real hand is hidden from view and a fake rubber hand is placed in front of them. A researcher then strokes both the real hand and the rubber hand simultaneously with a brush. After a short time, most people start to feel as though the rubber hand is their own hand. Their brain incorporates the fake hand into its body map, into its rendering of the body. And if the researcher suddenly hits the rubber hand with a hammer, the person flinches, even though their real hand is untouched. The brain has been tricked into updating the interface, into treating the rubber hand as part of the avatar. These illusions reveal something important. Your sense of reality, your sense of your own body, is not fixed. It's not a direct perception of what's out there. It's a construction, a model that your brain builds and constantly updates. And that model can be hacked, it can be fooled, because it's not reality. It's just the interface. Now, most of the time, the interface works well enough that you don't notice. It's seamless, consistent, reliable. But every now and then, the cracks show. You experience something that doesn't quite fit. A glitch in the matrix, as people like to say. Maybe you walk into a room and forget why you went there. Maybe you have a strong sense of déjà vu, the feeling that you've experienced this exact moment before. Maybe you see something out of the corner of your eye, something that wasn't there when you looked directly. These are moments where the interface stutters, where the rendering lags, where your brain's predictions don't quite match the incoming data. And for a brief instant, you glimpse the fact that what you're experiencing is not raw reality. It's a simulation, and simulations have glitches. There's also the phenomenon of dreams. Every night, you enter a state where the interface changes completely. The rules of physics stop applying. You can fly, you can breathe underwater, you can be in two places at once. People who are dead appear alive. Buildings shift and morph. Time becomes non-linear, and yet, while you're dreaming, it all seems perfectly normal. You don't question it. You accept the dream world as reality. It's only when you wake up that you realize it was a simulation. But here's the question. If your brain can generate an entire convincing reality while you're asleep, complete with sights, sounds, emotions, and a sense of self, then how do you know it's not doing the same thing while you're awake? What's the difference? You might say, well, waking reality is consistent. It follows rules. Other people experience the same things I do. But dreams can be consistent too, at least within the dream. They have their own internal logic. And as for other people, you only experience other people within your own headset. You have no way of knowing if they're experiencing the same reality you are. For all you know, waking life is just a more stable, more persistent dream. One with better graphics and more consistent physics. But a dream nonetheless. Hoffman would say that's exactly what it is. Waking life is a dream. A collective dream, perhaps, shaped by the fact that many consciousnesses are accessing the same underlying reality. But still a dream, still a rendering, still an interface. And just like in a nighttime dream, the objects and people you encounter are not what they seem. They're symbols, representations, icons generated by consciousness to navigate the simulation. The difference is, you're so immersed in the waking dream that you've forgotten it's a dream. You've identified completely with the character, with the avatar. You think you are the body. You think the world is made of matter. You think space and time are real, but they're not. They're just part of the headset, part of the game, and the real you, the consciousness that's playing the game, is something far stranger and more vast than anything you've imagined. So what happens when you start to realize this? When you begin to see the world as an interface, as a simulation, as a dream? Does everything fall apart? Do you lose your grip on reality? Or do you gain a deeper understanding, a new kind of freedom? Because if the world you're perceiving is just a rendering, then it's not as solid as you thought. It's not as fixed, it's malleable, and you, as the consciousness generating it, have more power than you realized. Not magical power, not the ability to bend spoons with your mind, but the power that comes from understanding the true nature of what you're experiencing. The power to stop taking it so seriously, to stop identifying so completely with the avatar, to recognize that you are not trapped in this body, in this life, in this narrow sliver of perception. You are the thing that's creating all of it, and that changes everything. Now we need to address the most radical implication of everything we've discussed so far. If your brain is not creating consciousness, if consciousness is actually creating your brain, then we need to flip our entire understanding of reality upside down. We've been taught that consciousness is a product of the physical world. That matter came first, organized itself into increasingly complex forms, eventually producing brains sophisticated enough to generate awareness. But what if it's the other way around? What if consciousness came first? What if consciousness is not something that emerges from matter, but rather matter is something that emerges from consciousness? This is the core of Hoffman's theory. And it's not just philosophical speculation. He's built mathematical models to support it. Models that treat conscious agents, not particles or fields, as the fundamental building blocks of reality. In his framework, everything starts with consciousness. Consciousness interacting with itself, observing itself, creating patterns and structures. And those patterns, when viewed through the interface of space-time, appear to us as physical objects, particles, forces, matter, energy. But at the deepest level, there are no particles. There's only consciousness. This sounds absurd at first. How could consciousness exist without a brain? How could it exist before matter? But think about it this way. You know for certain that consciousness exists. You're experiencing it right now. You're aware, you're perceiving, you're thinking. That's undeniable. But do you know for certain that matter exists? Not really. All you know is that you're experiencing what you interpret as matter. You see objects, you touch surfaces. But as we've established, those experiences are renderings. They're part of the interface. You've never actually encountered matter itself. You've only encountered your brain's representation of matter. So which is more fundamental? The thing you know exists for certain, consciousness, or the thing you only infer exists based on your perceptions matter? When you put it that way, it makes more sense to start with consciousness, to treat it as the ground of reality, and then explain how the appearance of matter, the appearance of a physical world, emerges from that ground. And this is exactly what Hoffman's mathematical framework attempts to do. He starts with what he calls conscious agents, simple units of awareness that can perceive, decide, and act. These agents interact with each other in specific patterns. And those patterns of interaction, when translated through the interface we call space-time, appear as the physical laws we observe: gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces. All of it, in this view, is just the interface's way of representing patterns of consciousness interacting with itself. Hoffman has even published peer-reviewed papers showing how, starting from these mathematical descriptions of conscious agents, you can derive aspects of quantum mechanics and relativity. He's not just saying consciousness is fundamental and leaving it at that. He's building the math. He's showing how space-time itself, the arena we think everything happens in, can emerge from networks of conscious agents interacting according to precise mathematical rules. In one recent paper, he demonstrated that the speed of light, the fact that a light always travels at the same speed, regardless of the observer's motion, can be derived from his theory of consciousness. This is extraordinary. It means that one of the most fundamental features of our physical reality, one that Einstein built his entire theory of relativity upon, is not a brute fact about the universe, is a consequence of how consciousness structures its own experience. The speed of light is part of the interface, part of the desktop, and behind it is something deeper, something that has nothing to do with light or speed or space at all. It's patterns of awareness, interacting, observing, creating the appearance of a physical world. Now, if consciousness is fundamental, if it's the thing that actually exists, then what does that make you? You're not a body that somehow generated consciousness. your consciousness that's generating the experience of having a body. The body is the avatar, the character, the icon, and you, the real you, are the consciousness behind it. But here's where it gets even stranger. If consciousness is fundamental, and if everything in the physical world is just consciousness viewed through an interface, then there's no reason to think that your consciousness and my consciousness are separate. In fact, Hoffman argues, they're not. At the deepest level, there is only one consciousness, one infinite, eternal awareness, and all of the apparently separate consciousnesses, all of the individual people and animals, and perhaps even plants and microorganisms, are just that one consciousness experiencing itself from different perspectives, different headsets, different avatars. You think you're separate from me because you're looking through a different headset, you have a different body, different memories, different thoughts, but those are all part of the interface. They're not the reality. The reality is that you and I are the same consciousness, the same awareness, just wearing different masks, playing different roles, living different stories. This idea appears in many spiritual traditions. Hinduism teaches that Atman, the individual self, is identical to Brahman, the universal self. The Upanishads, ancient Hindu texts, state it plainly, Tattvamasi, thou art that, you are it. The thing you're seeking, the ultimate reality, is not separate from you, it is you. Buddhism suggests that the sense of a separate self is an illusion, and that all beings are interconnected in a web of dependent origination. The Buddha taught that clinging to the idea of a permanent, independent self is the root of suffering. When you see through that illusion, when you recognize that the boundaries between self and other are constructed, not real, suffering falls away. Sufism, the mystical branch of Islam, speaks of the lover and the beloved being one. The great Sufi poet Rumi wrote, "You are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop." He was pointing to this same truth, that what you think of as your small, limited self is actually the infinite, viewed from one particular angle. Christian mystics have described union with the divine, the dissolving of the boundary between self and God. Meister Eckhart, a medieval Christian mystic, said, "The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. There's no separation. The observer and the observed are one." These traditions have been saying for thousands of years what Hoffman is now trying to express mathematically. That separation is illusion, that at the deepest level there is only one thing, one consciousness, one reality, experiencing itself through countless forms, and if that's true, then the implications are staggering. It means that when you look at another person, you're not looking at someone separate from you. You're looking at yourself. Another version of the same consciousness, wearing a different headset, playing a different character. The homeless person on the street, that's you. The billionaire in the mansion, that's you. The person who loves you, you. The person who hates you, also you. Every human being who has ever lived or ever will live is you, experiencing life from a different angle. And it's not just humans. Animals too. The dog wagging its tail, the bird singing in the tree, the ant carrying a crumb. All of them are you, the same consciousness, filtered through different biological interfaces, experiencing reality in ways you can't imagine, but that are no less valid than your own experience. The spider in the corner, the fish in the ocean, the bacteria in your gut, or you. Different expressions of the same underlying awareness. And if you take this idea seriously, it changes everything. It means there's no one to compete with. You're not in a race against other people because there are no other people. Not ultimately. There's just you in countless disguises, interacting with yourself. It means there's no one to judge. When you judge someone else, you're judging yourself. When you harm someone else, you're harming yourself. And when you love someone else, you're loving yourself. This is what spiritual teachers mean when they say, love your neighbour as yourself. Not as a moral command, something you should do to be good, but as a description of reality. Your neighbour is yourself, just wearing a different mask. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says something even more direct. he says, "I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me." And when people ask him, "When did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger?" he answers, "Whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me." He's not speaking metaphorically, he's pointing to the truth that every person you encounter is the divine in disguise, is consciousness wearing a mask, is you. Now you might be thinking, this sounds like solipsism, the idea that only I exist and everything else is just my imagination. But it's not quite that. Solipsism says that you, the individual ego, are the only thing that exists, that everyone else is just a figment of your personal imagination. Hoffman is saying the opposite. He's saying that the individual ego, the sense of being a separate person named so-and-so with a particular body and history, is an illusion. What exists is consciousness. Not your consciousness or my consciousness, but consciousness itself, singular, universal. And that consciousness is experiencing reality through billions of different perspectives simultaneously. So it's not that you're alone, it's that you're everyone. You're not isolated in your own private universe. You're everything, experiencing itself from every possible angle. This is a critical distinction. Solipsism is lonely. It's the idea that you're the only real thing in a world of phantoms. But this, what Hoffman and the mystics are describing, is the opposite of lonely. It's the recognition that you are intimately, inextricably connected to everything and everyone, that there is no separation. That loneliness itself is impossible because there's no other to be separated from. There's only you, everywhere, always. But let's ground this in something more tangible. If consciousness is creating the brain, rather than the brain creating consciousness, then there should be evidence of this, and there is. Consider the hard problem of consciousness, a term coined by philosopher David Chalmers. The hard problem is this: why does physical processing in the brain give rise to subjective experience? Why is there something it's like to see red, to taste chocolate, to feel pain? Science can explain, in principle, how the brain processes information, how neurons fire, how signals are transmitted, how networks activate. Neuroscientists can map which brain regions light up when you see the colour red. They can trace the pathway from your retina through your optic nerve to your visual cortex. They can describe the chemical reactions that occur when chocolate touches your tongue and sends signals to your brain. But none of this explains why any of it feels like something. Why there's an inner world of experience at all. This is the explanatory gap. The chasm between objective physical processes and subjective experience. And physicalist theories that say matter is fundamental, have been trying to solve this problem for decades, and they've made no progress. Not because scientists aren't smart enough, but because the problem may be unsolvable within that framework. If you start with matter and try to get to consciousness, you hit a wall. There's no bridge, no explanation for how unconscious particles, following physical laws, could suddenly give rise to awareness, to the feeling of what it's like to be something. But if you flip it around, if you start with consciousness, the problem disappears. Of course there's subjective experience. That's what exists. That's the ground of reality. The question isn't how matter creates consciousness. The question is how consciousness creates the appearance of matter. And that's a question Hoffman's mathematical models are beginning to answer. He's showing that what we perceive as physical objects, as brains and neurons and chemical reactions, are just the interface's way of representing patterns of conscious agents interacting. The brain doesn't generate your experience of red. Your experience of red, generated by consciousness, appears within the interface as brain activity when you look at it with the right instruments. The correlation between brain states and mental states isn't evidence that the brain creates the mind. It's evidence that the mind creates the brain as a symbol, an icon, to represent how it's structuring its own experience. Consider also the phenomenon of near-death experiences. Thousands of people have reported experiencing vivid, coherent consciousness during times when their brains were clinically non-functional, no measurable brain activity, no blood flow to the brain, and yet they report being aware, seeing things, hearing conversations. Some even report leaving their bodies and observing the operating room from above, later describing details they couldn't have seen from their position on the table, instruments that were on top of cabinets, conversations happening in other rooms, events occurring while they were declared clinically dead. Skeptics dismiss these as hallucinations, tricks of a dying brain. But if the brain were dying, if it were shutting down, how could it generate such vivid, organized experiences? How could it create complex narratives, detailed visual scenes, and profound emotional states with no oxygen, no blood flow, no measurable electrical activity? Wouldn't a dying brain produce chaos, noise, random, fragmented images at best? Yet near-death experiences are often extraordinarily coherent. People report encountering deceased relatives, moving through tunnels of light, experiencing profound peace, reviewing their entire lives in an instant, encountering beings of light and feeling more awake, more aware, more real than they've ever felt in ordinary life. Many say that compared to the near-death experience, everyday waking life feels like the dream. This is exactly what you'd expect if consciousness is not dependent on the brain. If the brain is just the interface, and when the interface shuts down or malfunctions, consciousness doesn't disappear. It just stops, being filtered through that particular headset. And without the constraints of the headset, without the limitations of the body and the physical senses, consciousness experiences reality more directly. Which is why near-death experiences often feel more real than ordinary life, more vivid, more profound. Because they are. Their consciousness experience in itself without the interface in the way. Without the reducing valve of the brain filtering everything down to what's useful for survival. Now, let's return to the question of what happens when you die. If consciousness is fundamental, if you are not your body or your brain, but the consciousness generating the experience of a body and brain, then death is not the end, it's just a transition. The headset comes off, the interface shuts down, but you, the consciousness, remain. Because you were never inside the headset to begin with, you were always outside it, projecting into it, experiencing through it. So what happens next? Hoffman admits he doesn't know for certain, no one does, but he speculates based on the logic of his framework. One possibility is that consciousness simply returns to its natural state, unfiltered, unbounded, no longer confined to the narrow perspective of a single body in space and time, just pure awareness, infinite, eternal, without subject or object, without self or other, just being. Many people who've had deep meditative experiences describe something like this, a state where the sense of individual identity dissolves, where there's no longer a me experiencing something separate from me, just experience itself, awareness without content. They describe it not as nothingness, not as void in the negative sense, but as fullness, complete, lacking nothing. And they often describe it as the most peaceful, most complete state they've ever known, not because something wonderful is happening, but because nothing needs to happen. There's no lack, no desire, no fear, just being. And perhaps that's what death is, a return to that state, not as an ending, but as a homecoming. But there's another possibility. Maybe consciousness, after shedding one interface, takes on another body, another life, another perspective. This is the idea of reincarnation, which appears in Hinduism, Buddhism, and many other traditions. And from Hoffman's framework, it makes sense. If consciousness is exploring itself through different perspectives, why would it stop at one? Why not experience life as a peasant and a king, a man and a woman, a human and an animal, across different times and places? Each life would be like putting on a different VR headset, playing a different game, seeing reality from a completely new angle, and over countless lifetimes, consciousness would come to know itself fully, not through abstract reasoning, but through direct experience, by being everything, by living every possible life, seeing through every possible pair of eyes, feeling every possible emotion. Consciousness explores the infinite variations of its own nature. This also explains why life can be so difficult, why suffering exists. If you're here to learn, to grow, to explore, then challenges are not bugs in the system, they're features, they're opportunities. If life were easy, if everything came effortlessly, what would you learn? How would you grow? It's through struggle, through pain, through loss, that consciousness deepens its understanding of itself. A comfortable life might be pleasant, but it's a shallow life. It doesn't push you, it doesn't force you to question, to adapt, to transcend your limitations. And if you are that consciousness, if you, at some level, beyond your current awareness, chose this life, this body, this set of challenges, then even the hardest moments have meaning. Not because they're punishment, and not because you deserve them in some karmic sense of moral debt, but because they're part of the exploration, part of the game you decided to play. Before you were born, before you put on this particular headset, maybe you looked at the options available and thought, that one looks interesting. That life will teach me something. That perspective will show me an aspect of myself I haven't fully explored yet. And so you jumped in, you put on the headset, and you forgot that you chose it. Because if you remembered, if you knew it was all just a game, you wouldn't engage with it fully, you wouldn't feel the stakes, and without stakes, there's no growth, no discovery, no deepening of understanding. Now, this might sound cold. If suffering is just part of a game, does that make it okay? Does that mean we shouldn't try to reduce suffering, our own or others? Not at all. In fact, the opposite. If everyone around you is you, if the person suffering is literally you wearing a different mask, then alleviating their suffering is alleviating your own. Helping others is helping yourself, and harming others is harming yourself. This is the foundation of genuine compassion. Not pity, not charity from a position of superiority, but recognition. The recognition that we are not separate, that your pain is my pain, that your joy is my joy, because at the deepest level, there is no your or my, there's just us, or more accurately, just me, the one consciousness experiencing everything. This is why Jesus, when asked about the greatest commandment, said, "Love your neighbour as yourself," not as a nice suggestion, as a description of reality. Your neighbour is yourself, just in a different form. And in the parable of the sheep and the goats, when Jesus talks about the final judgment, he says that those who fed the hungry, clothed the naked, and visited the imprisoned were really doing those things to him, and those who ignored the suffering of others were ignoring him. He wasn't setting up an arbitrary moral test. He was pointing to the truth, that every person you encounter is the divine in disguise, is consciousness wearing a mask, is you. How you treat them is how you treat yourself. And more than that, how you treat them is how you treat God, or whatever word you want to use for the infinite consciousness underlying everything. But if this is all true, if you are infinite consciousness temporarily experiencing life as a limited human, then why don't you remember? Why don't you know who you really are? Why did you forget? Hoffman's answer is simple. Because if you knew, the game wouldn't work. Imagine playing a video game where you're fully aware the entire time that it's just a game, that the character isn't real, that nothing that happens actually matters, that you can just turn it off whenever you want and go back to your real life. Would you be invested? Would you care? Would you feel the tension, the excitement, the fear, the joy? Probably not. You'd be detached. Going through the motions. For the game to be meaningful, for it to be engaging, you have to forget. You have to identify with the character. You have to believe, at least while you're playing, that it's real, that the stakes matter, that what happens to the character happens to you. And that's what birth is. Putting on the headset and forgetting you put it on. Becoming so immersed in the game that you think you are the character. You think the game world is reality. You think your limited perspective is all there is. And in that forgetting, the game becomes real. The experiences become meaningful. The growth becomes possible. Because you're not holding back. You're not playing it safe. You're all in. And that's what spiritual awakening is. Remembering. Not through thinking or reasoning, although those can point the way, but through direct experience, seeing through the illusion, recognizing that the character is just a character, that the world is just an interface, and that you, the real you, are the consciousness behind it all. This doesn't mean the game stops. You still have a body, you still have responsibilities, you still experience pain and pleasure, but you stop taking it so seriously. You stop identifying so completely with the character. You start to play the game with more lightness, more humour, more compassion. Because you know it's just a game, and you know that everyone else is playing too. They're just so immersed they've forgotten. And that forgetting is part of their journey, part of what they came here to experience. So you don't judge them for it. You don't try to force them to wake up. You just play alongside them. And maybe, through your presence, through your example, you help them remember too. Not by preaching or convincing, but by being, by living from that recognition. By treating them as what they really are, yourself in another form. So where does this leave you right now? You're still here, still in the headset, still experiencing life as a separate individual in a world of objects. And that's okay. You don't need to transcend it. You don't need to escape. You don't need to reach some advanced spiritual state before you're allowed to be at peace. You just need to remember, even if only intellectually for now, that what you're experiencing is not the ultimate truth. It's an interface, a headset, a game, and you are not the character. You're the consciousness playing the character, and that consciousness is infinite, eternal, unborn, undying, totally free. You've always been free, you just forgot, and now, maybe, you're starting to remember. Let's make this personal now. Let's talk about what all of this means for you specifically. Not in abstract terms, not as philosophical theory, but as something that affects your life, your relationships, your sense of who you are and what you're doing here. Because if everything we've discussed is true, if you really are infinite consciousness temporarily wearing the mask of a human being, if the world you perceive is just an interface and everyone around you is you in disguise, then everything changes. The way you see yourself, the way you treat others, the way you respond to suffering, the way you pursue goals, the way you face death, everything. So let's start with the most immediate implication. If you are not your body, not your thoughts, not your personality, not your history, then who are you? What remains when you strip away all the labels, all the stories, all the identities you've constructed over a lifetime? Most people, if you ask them who they are, will give you their resume, their name, their job, their relationships, their achievements, their struggles. I'm a teacher. I'm a parent. I'm someone who overcame addiction. I'm someone who built a business from nothing. And these things are true in a sense. They're part of your experience, part of the story of this particular character. But they're not you. They're things that happen to the character, events in the game. And if you identify completely with them, you become trapped. You become rigid. You start defending the story, protecting the identity. And any threat to that identity feels like a threat to your very existence. But if you recognize that you're not the character, that you're the consciousness playing the character, then you can hold those identities more lightly. You can say, yes, in this life, in this game, I'm playing the role of a teacher, or a parent, or an entrepreneur, and I'll play that role as fully as I can, but I'm not ultimately defined by it. If circumstances change, if the role ends, I'm still here. The consciousness behind the role doesn't disappear. This gives you tremendous freedom, because it means you can fail without being destroyed. You can lose everything you've built and still be whole. You can watch your carefully constructed identity crumble and recognize that what you really are was never in danger. The character might suffer. The avatar might lose the game. But you, the player, are untouched. You just start a new game, or take off the headset and rest. This is what spiritual traditions mean by detachment. Not that you stop caring, not that you become cold or indifferent, but that you stop identifying so completely with the outcomes. You stop thinking that your worth, your value, your very existence depends on whether the character succeeds or fails. And paradoxically, when you stop clinging so tightly to outcomes, you often perform better. Because you're not paralyzed by fear. You're not playing defensively. You're free to take risks, to experiment, to play the game fully without the crushing weight of thinking that everything depends on it. Now let's talk about other people. If everyone you encounter is the same consciousness wearing a different mask, then every interaction becomes sacred. Not in a religious sense necessarily, but in the sense that you're meeting yourself. When you talk to another person, you're not talking to someone separate from you. You're engaging in a kind of dialogue between different aspects of the same awareness, and this changes how you listen. Most people don't really listen. They wait for their turn to talk. They're thinking about what they're going to say next, rehearsing their response, judging what the other person is saying based on whether they agree or disagree. But if you recognize that the person in front of you is you, then listening becomes something else entirely. It becomes a kind of curiosity. What am I experiencing from this perspective? What does life look like through these eyes? What have I learned in this particular form that I haven't learned in mine? And you stop needing to be right. You stop needing to convince or defend or win. Because there's no one to win against. There's just you, exploring different viewpoints, trying to understand yourself more fully. This doesn't mean you never disagree. It doesn't mean you accept everything everyone says as equally valid. But it means you can disagree without animosity. You can say, I see it differently, without needing to destroy the other person's perspective, because their perspective is also you, just looking from a different angle. This also transforms how you respond to people who hurt you. Betrayal, cruelty, harm. These things still happen, the game still has conflict. But when someone harms you, instead of seeing them as an enemy, as someone fundamentally separate from you who chose to do evil, you can ask a different question. What am I trying to teach myself through this experience? What aspect of myself am I encountering in this person? What have I not yet understood? This doesn't mean you excuse harmful behavior. It doesn't mean you allow yourself to be abused. Boundaries are still important. Consequences are still necessary, but it means you don't carry the poison of hatred. You don't spend years rehearsing revenge fantasies, imagining the other person's suffering, wishing them harm. Because hating them is hating yourself. Wishing harm on them is wishing harm on yourself. And at some level, maybe in this life or maybe in another, you will experience what they experienced. You will be them. You will see through their eyes, and you'll understand why they did what they did. Not to justify it, but to complete the circle, to know yourself fully from every angle, even the dark ones. There's a story about a soldier who returned from war haunted by the people he'd killed. He couldn't sleep, couldn't find peace, and a spiritual teacher told him, in another life, you will be each of those people. You will live their lives, you will love what they loved, and you will die the deaths they died. And when you've lived all of those lives, you'll understand. And the soldier, instead of being horrified, felt relief. Because it meant that the separation, the violence, the tragedy was temporary. That ultimately, everyone would understand everyone. That no one would be left outside, that all would be reconciled, because all is one. Now let's talk about fear. Most fear comes from the belief that you are this small, fragile, limited thing that can be damaged or destroyed. You fear losing your job because you think it defines your worth. You fear rejection because you think it means you're unlovable. You fear illness because you think your body is all you are. You fear death because you think it's the end. But if you're not the body, if you're not the personality, if you're not any of the things you've identified with, then what is there to fear? The body will age and die. That's part of the game. But you, the consciousness, were never born and will never die. You existed before this body and you'll exist after it. The personality, the ego, the sense of being this particular person, that will dissolve when the headset comes off. But you won't miss it, because you never were it. It was just a mask. And when you take off a mask, you don't mourn the mask. You're relieved to breathe freely again. This doesn't mean you become reckless. You still take care of the body. You still navigate the world carefully, but you're not controlled by fear. You're not constantly in a defensive crouch trying to protect something that was never in danger. And this changes how you live. You take risks you wouldn't have taken. You speak truths you would have hidden. You pursue what genuinely interests you instead of what you think will keep you safe. Because safety, in the ultimate sense, is not something you need to achieve. You already are safe. You've always been safe. You're the infinite consciousness that cannot be harmed. Let's talk about meaning. One of the most common sources of suffering in modern life is the feeling that life is meaningless, that you're just a random collection of atoms stumbling through a purposeless universe, destined to die and be forgotten. And if that's what you believe, if you really believe you're nothing but a temporary arrangement of matter, then why do anything? Why try? Why care? But if your consciousness exploring itself, if every life is an opportunity to experience reality from a new angle, then everything has meaning. Not because there's some grand cosmic plan handed down from on high, but because you're the one creating the meaning. Every moment is significant because you're experiencing it. Every relationship matters because it's you meeting yourself. Every challenge is meaningful because it's shaping your understanding. You're not a meaningless speck in an indifferent universe. You're the universe, becoming aware of itself. Your infinity exploring its own nature through the particular lens of this body, this mind, this moment. And when you recognize that, life stops feeling empty. It becomes rich, textured, full. Even the painful moments, even the boring ones, because they're all part of the exploration, all part of the great game of consciousness knowing itself. Now let's talk about desire. You've been taught that you should want things. Success, wealth, love, recognition. And there's nothing wrong with wanting these things. They're part of the game. But when you identify completely with the character, when you think you are the body and the ego, then desire becomes desperate. You think you need these things to be complete, to be whole, to be worthy, and you suffer when you don't get them, or you get them and realize they don't fill the hole you thought they would. But if you know who you really are, if you recognize that you're already complete, already whole, already infinite, then desire becomes lighter. You can want things without needing them. You can pursue goals without thinking your worth depends on achieving them. You can enjoy success without clinging to it. You can experience failure without being destroyed by it. Because nothing you gain or lose in the game changes what you fundamentally are. This is what spiritual teachers mean when they talk about non-attachment. Not that you stop wanting anything, not that you become passive or indifferent, but that you stop thinking happiness is somewhere else. That you stop believing that if you just get this one thing, everything will finally be okay. Because you realize that okayness, wholeness, peace, these things are your natural state. They're what you are when you stop struggling, when you stop trying to become something other than what you already are. Let's talk about suffering. You're going to suffer in this life. The body will experience pain. The mind will experience loss, disappointment, grief. This is part of being human, part of the game. But there's a difference between pain and suffering. Pain is what happens to the body. You cut your hand, it hurts. You lose someone you love, you feel grief. That's pain. It's natural. It's part of the experience. But suffering is what happens when you resist the pain. When you tell yourself it shouldn't be happening. When you add a story on top of the pain. This is unfair. Why me? I don't deserve this. This shouldn't be happening. That's suffering. And suffering is optional, not in the sense that you can always avoid it, but in the sense that it's not inherent in the experience itself. It's something you add, and if you recognize that you're not ultimately the body, not ultimately the mind, then you can experience pain without the layer of suffering on top. You can feel grief without the story that you're broken. You can face loss without the belief that you've been abandoned by the universe, because you know that the universe isn't separate from you. You are the universe. And everything that happens to you is something you, at a deeper level, are experiencing by choice. Not because you consciously chose it in this moment, but because the infinite consciousness that you are chose to take on this perspective, this body, this life, knowing full well what it would include. The pain was part of the package, and at some level, deeper than the personality can understand, you said yes to it. Now let's talk about death. This is the fear that underlies all other fears. The fear that one day you will cease to exist. That everything you've experienced, everything you've loved, everything you are will simply end. And in the darkness, there will be nothing. But if consciousness is fundamental, if you are not your body or your brain, but the awareness generating the experience of a body and brain, then death is not the end. It's a transition. The headset comes off. The interface shuts down. But you remain. And here's what's remarkable. People who've had near-death experiences almost universally report losing their fear of death afterward. Not because they believe in an afterlife in some abstract way, but because they've experienced directly that consciousness continues when the body fails. They've felt themselves leave the body. They've experienced awareness, clarity, even joy, while their physical brain was non-functional. And they come back changed, not afraid, because they know from direct experience that what they are cannot die. Now, you might not have a near-death experience. Most people don't. But you can still reflect on the logic of it. If consciousness is creating the brain, rather than the brain creating consciousness, then when the brain dies, consciousness doesn't disappear. It just stops using that particular interface. Like turning off a television, the show doesn't cease to exist. It just stops being broadcast on that screen. You can turn on another television, another interface, and the show continues. Some traditions say that after death, there's a period of rest, a kind of in-between state where consciousness reviews the life that just ended, sees what was learned, what was missed, what patterns need to be explored further, and then, when ready, consciousness takes on a new form, a new body, a new life. Not because it's forced to, but because it wants to, because there's more to explore, more to understand, more to experience. Other traditions say that after many lifetimes, consciousness can choose to remain in its natural state, unfiltered, unbounded, not taking on any more forms, just resting as pure awareness, infinite, eternal, at peace. Which one is true, no one knows for certain, but what's clear from both logic and from the reports of those who've glimpsed beyond the veil is that death is not annihilation, it's transformation, a shedding of the limited for the unlimited, a return home. And when you really understand that, when you feel it not just intellectually but in your bones, the fear dissolves, not because you're trying to be brave, but because there's nothing to fear. You were never at risk. You can't lose yourself because you're not the thing you thought you were. You're not the body that ages. You're not the personality that changes. You're the awareness behind it all. The consciousness that was here before the body formed and will be here after it returns to dust. Now let's talk about this moment, right now. Because for all the talk of infinite consciousness and eternal awareness and lives beyond this one, you're here now, in a body, with thoughts, with feelings, with circumstances. And the question is, how do you live? How do you show up in this moment knowing what you know? The answer, paradoxically, is both simpler and more difficult than you might think. You live fully. You engage completely. You don't hold back waiting for some future moment when you'll finally be enlightened enough to start really living. You don't treat this life as a practice run for something better. You recognize that this moment right now is it. This is the game. This is the exploration. This is consciousness knowing itself through your eyes, your hands, your heart. And it deserves your full presence, not your divided attention, not your distracted half effort, but your whole being, awake, alert, engaged. At the same time, you hold it lightly. You don't cling, you don't grasp, you don't try to freeze the moment and make it permanent. Because you know that everything is changing, the body is changing, the world is changing, and that's not a problem. That's the nature of the game. The interface is designed to be dynamic, not static, and trying to hold on to what's already flowing past is like trying to grab water. You just end up frustrated. So you live fully and you let go completely. You love without possessing. You create without clinging to what you've made. You engage without demanding that things go your way. You play the game seriously, as if it matters, because in a sense it does. And at the same time, you remember that it's just a game, just an interface, just one perspective among infinite perspectives, and that paradox, that balance, is the art of living awake. It's what the mystics and sages have been pointing to for millennia. Not transcendence in the sense of escaping the world, but presence in the sense of being fully here, while knowing that here is not all there is. Now let's talk about other people again, because if you really take this seriously, if you really start to see everyone as yourself, in disguise, it changes not just how you treat them, but what you expect from them. You stop needing them to validate you. You stop needing them to complete you. You stop thinking that if you could just find the right person, the right relationship, the right community, then you'd finally be happy. Because you realize that happiness is not something someone else can give you. It's your natural state when you stop looking for it outside yourself. And relationships, instead of being transactional, instead of being about what you can get from the other person, become about exploration, about curiosity. What is it like to be you? What do you see that I don't? How can I learn from this encounter with myself in another form? And when relationships end, as they sometimes do, you don't interpret it as failure. You don't think it means you're unlovable or that the other person betrayed you. You recognize that people come into your life for a reason, teach you what you need to learn, and then move on. And that's okay. That's part of the flow. Trying to hold on to someone who's ready to leave is like trying to hold on to summer when autumn is already here. You can do it, but you'll suffer, and you'll miss the beauty of what's actually happening. So you love fully while people are here, and you release them gracefully when it's time for them to go, knowing that you haven't lost them. Because they were never separate from you. They were just you, in another form, teaching you something you needed to know. And that teaching is complete. Now let's talk about your purpose. People spend their entire lives searching for their purpose. Why am I here? What am I supposed to do? What's my mission? And they think that if they could just figure it out, everything would make sense. Everything would fall into place. But what if there's no single purpose? What if you're here for the same reason consciousness takes on any form? To explore, to experience, to know itself from this particular angle. Your purpose is not something you need to find. It's something you're already living. Every moment you're fulfilling your purpose. Because your purpose is to be conscious, to be aware, to experience this life fully. Everything else, the job, the relationships, the achievements, those are just flavors. Different ways the exploration unfolds, and they're all equally valid. You're not more spiritual if you become a monk than if you become a plumber. You're not closer to enlightenment if you meditate for hours every day than if you raise children or build businesses. Because the point is not to transcend the world. The point is to experience it fully from whatever position you're in. To bring consciousness, awareness, presence to whatever you're doing. That's the purpose. Not to achieve something, not to become someone, but to be awake, here, now, in this body, in this moment. And when you recognize that, the search for purpose ends, because you realize you've been living it all along. You just didn't know it. You were looking for something grand, something special, something that would make you different from everyone else. But the truth is simpler and more profound. You're already special, because you're consciousness itself, and there's nothing more special than that. So what does all of this mean for how you live going forward? It means you stop waiting. Stop waiting for permission. Stop waiting for the right moment. Stop waiting to be ready. You recognize that you'll never feel completely ready. The ego will always find reasons to hesitate, to doubt, to hold back. But you're not the ego. You're the consciousness behind it. And consciousness doesn't hesitate. It simply acts. It moves. It creates. Without needing to know how everything will turn out. Without needing guarantees. Because it knows that whatever happens is part of the exploration. Part of the game. And even the so-called failures are just data, just information, just consciousness, learning what it's like to experience this particular path. So you act, you move forward, you take the risk, you say the thing you've been afraid to say, you start the project you've been postponing, you reach out to the person you've been avoiding, not because you're sure it will work out, but because you're here to explore. And exploration requires movement, requires stepping into the unknown, requires not knowing. And finally, it means you stop judging yourself. Stop thinking you should be further along. Stop comparing yourself to others. Stop measuring your worth by external standards. Because you're not in competition with anyone. How could you be? Everyone is you. You're not behind, you're not ahead, you're exactly where you are, and where you are is exactly where you need to be for this particular exploration. The consciousness that you are chose this life, this body, this set of circumstances, not randomly, not as punishment, but as an opportunity. And every moment of it, even the painful ones, even the confusing ones, is part of what you came here to experience. So instead of fighting against it, instead of wishing things were different, you can relax into it, accept it, say yes to it, not in a passive way, not giving up, but in an active way, recognizing that this is your life, this is your game, and you might as well play it fully, because it's the only one you've got right now. So here we are. You've journeyed through the science of perception, through the mathematics of consciousness, through the philosophical implications of what it means to be aware. You've seen the evidence that your senses deceive you, that your brain constructs reality rather than recording it, that space-time itself might be nothing more than an interface, a user-friendly fiction designed by evolution to help you survive. You've encountered the radical possibility that consciousness doesn't emerge from matter, but that matter emerges from consciousness. That you're not a body that somehow generated awareness, but awareness that's generating the experience of a body. And you've grappled with the most unsettling implication of all, that the person you think you are, the individual self with its unique history and personality and future, might be nothing more than a character in a game, a mask worn by infinite consciousness, a temporary perspective through which the universe is experienced in itself. So what now? How do you live with this knowledge? How do you navigate a world that you now suspect is an illusion? How do you care about anything when you know it's all just part of the interface? These are not easy questions, and the answers are not simple, but they're worth exploring. Because this knowledge, if you take it seriously, if you let it sink in, has the power to transform everything, not in some abstract, theoretical way, but in the most practical, immediate sense, in how you wake up tomorrow morning, in how you speak to the people in your life, in how you respond when things don't go your way, in how you face the inevitable end of this particular game. Let's start with the most common objection. If reality is an illusion, why does anything matter? Why shouldn't I just do whatever I want? Why should I care about other people if they're not real? This is understandable, and it's a question that many people have when they first encounter these ideas, but it's based on a misunderstanding. Reality being an interface doesn't mean nothing matters. It means everything matters differently. When you recognize that the person in front of you is not separate from you, that they're you wearing a different mask, it doesn't make them less real, it makes them more important. Because harming them is harming yourself. Helping them is helping yourself. Not in some distant karmic sense where good deeds will be rewarded in a future life, but immediately, directly, what you do to them, you do to you, because there is no them, there's only you. This is the opposite of nihilism. Nihilism says nothing matters because nothing is real, but this perspective says everything matters because everything is you. Every interaction is sacred. Every moment is an opportunity to meet yourself, to know yourself, to treat yourself with the compassion or the cruelty that will shape the kind of universe you're creating, because you are creating it, moment by moment, choice by choice. The interface responds to your consciousness, and the world you experience tomorrow is shaped by how you show up today. Now let's talk about meditation, because if everything we've discussed is true, if you're not the body or the thoughts or the personality, then how do you experience that directly? How do you move from intellectual understanding to lived reality? This is where meditation comes in, not as a relaxation technique, not as stress management, but as a tool for seeing through the interface, for experiencing consciousness without content. When you sit in meditation, you're not trying to achieve anything. You're not trying to become enlightened or reach some special state. You're simply observing. You watch your thoughts arise and pass. You feel sensations in your body appear and disappear. You notice emotions emerge and dissolve, and gradually, if you stay with it, you begin to recognize something profound. You're not any of these things. You're not the thought. You're the awareness watching the thought. You're not the sensation. You're the space in which the sensation appears. You're not the emotion. You're the consciousness experiencing the emotion. And those thoughts, sensations, and emotions, they come and go. They're temporary, fleeting. But the awareness, the consciousness, that's constant. That's always here. That's what you are. And when you recognize that directly, not as an idea, but as a lived experience, everything shifts. The world doesn't disappear. You don't transcend the body, but you stop identifying so completely with it. You stop thinking that you are the character. You recognize that you're the player, and that changes everything. Donald Hoffman himself meditates several hours a day. Not because he's trying to escape reality, but because he's trying to experience what lies beneath the interface. He's spent decades building mathematical models of consciousness, proving theorems, publishing papers. And all of that is valuable. It gives us a framework, a way of thinking about these ideas rigorously. But at some point, he recognized that no amount of theorizing will give you direct access to what you are. For that, you need to drop the concepts. You need to sit in silence. You need to let the interface fall away and see what remains. Many people who take up a serious meditation practice report similar experiences. They describe moments where the sense of being a separate self dissolves, where the boundary between self and world disappears, where there's just awareness, just being, no subject, no object, just this. And they often describe it as the most real thing they've ever experienced. More real than waking life, more real than dreams, because it's unfiltered. It's consciousness experiencing itself directly, without the reducing valve of the brain in the way. And when they return to ordinary consciousness, when they open their eyes and see the world again, they know. They know from direct experience that what they are transcends the body, transcends the mind, transcends space and time. They know it the way you know you're conscious right now, not because someone told you, not because you figured it out, but because you're experiencing it. But meditation is not the only path. There are many ways to glimpse what lies beneath the interface. Art can do it, music can do it, dance. Psychedelics, though that path is not for everyone and comes with risks. Even ordinary activities, if done with full presence, can become doorways. Washing dishes, walking in nature, playing with a child, anything that pulls you fully into the present moment, that quiets the endless chatter of thought, can give you a taste of what you are beyond the character. The key is presence, full, complete, undivided attention. When you're truly present, the interface becomes transparent. You see through it, not because it disappears, but because you recognize it for what it is. A rendering, a simulation, a useful fiction, and you, the awareness behind it, remain untouched, unmoved, at peace. This doesn't mean you become passive. It doesn't mean you stop caring about the world. If anything, you care more deeply, because you're no longer distracted by the ego's endless demands. You're no longer caught up in defending your self-image, protecting your territory, comparing yourself to others. All of that falls away, and what remains is a simple, direct engagement with what is. You see a person in need, you help. Not because you should, not because it will make you look good, but because helping them is as natural as moving your hand. They're you. How could you not help? You see beauty, you appreciate it, fully, completely, without needing to photograph it or post it or tell anyone about it. The experience itself is enough. You encounter pain, yours or someone else's, and you don't run from it. You don't cover it up with distractions. You meet it directly, you feel it fully, and then it passes. Because everything passes. That's the nature of the interface. Nothing in it is permanent. Everything arises, exists for a time, and dissolves, and you, the awareness, watch it all, untouched. Now let's talk about death again, because this is where the rubber meets the road. You can talk about consciousness being fundamental. You can talk about the body being an avatar, the interface being a simulation. But when you're lying in bed at night and you think about the fact that one day, maybe tomorrow, maybe in 50 years, this body will stop functioning, the heart will stop beating, the brain will shut down, and there will be no more mornings, no more conversations, no more anything in this form. The fear comes, and it's not an intellectual fear, it's visceral, primal. The ego, the sense of being this particular person, wants desperately to continue, and the thought of its ending is terrifying. So how do you face that? How do you live with the knowledge that this body will die? First, you recognize that the fear is natural. It's part of the interface. Evolution designed you to fear death because organisms that didn't fear it didn't survive long enough to reproduce, so the fear is hardwired. It's not a personal failing. It's a feature of the game. But you're not just the character experiencing the fear. You're also the awareness watching the character experience the fear, and that awareness is not afraid, because it knows it can't die. It knows it was never born. It exists outside of time, before the body formed and after the body dissolves. The awareness remains, and when you can access that perspective, even briefly, the fear loosens its grip. Not because you've convinced yourself of something, but because you've experienced something deeper than thought. You've touched the part of yourself that doesn't die. Hoffman tells a story about his own encounter with death. A few years ago, his heart failed. He was rushed to the emergency room multiple times. He had surgeries. He spent weeks in intensive care, unsure if he would survive. And during those moments, when death felt very close, he had to face his own fear, his own attachment to this body, this life, this identity as Donald Hoffman, professor, scientist, husband. And what he found was that the fear was real. The attachment was strong. Even though he spent decades thinking about these ideas, even though he meditates for hours every day, even though he knows intellectually that consciousness is fundamental and the body is just an avatar, when the body was in danger, the ego panicked. And he doesn't judge himself for that. He recognizes it as part of being human, part of the game, but he also noticed something else. Beneath the fear, there was something untouched, a quiet awareness that simply observed, that watched the fear arise, that watched the thoughts spinning, that watched the body struggling, and that awareness was at peace. Not because everything was okay, but because it knew that whatever happened to the body, it would remain. And that knowledge, that direct experience, changed how he related to death. He's still not eager to die. He still takes care of his body. He still hopes for more time. But the terror is gone, replaced by a kind of curiosity. What happens next? What does consciousness experience when the interface shuts down? He doesn't know, but he's not afraid to find out. And this is available to you too. You don't need to wait until you're facing death to explore this. You can explore it now. In meditation, in moments of deep presence, in the quiet spaces between thoughts, you can touch the part of yourself that doesn't depend on the body, that exists before thought, that remains when thinking stops. And the more you touch it, the more familiar it becomes. Until one day you recognize it as your true nature, not the character, not the personality, not the story, but the awareness itself. The consciousness that's been here all along, watching, experiencing, being. And when you know that, really know it, not as a belief, but as a direct experience, death stops being the enemy. It becomes just another transition, just another moment in the eternal exploration of consciousness, knowing itself. Now let's talk about love. Because if you are everyone, if everyone you meet is you in disguise, then love is not something you need to find. It's something you already are. The separation that makes love feel like reaching across a gap, like two separate beings trying to connect. That separation is the illusion. At the deepest level, there is no gap. There is no other. There is only you, meeting yourself, recognizing yourself, loving yourself. This doesn't diminish love. It deepens it. Because it means that love is not dependent on the other person behaving a certain way. It's not conditional. It's not something you give in exchange for something you receive. It's simply the recognition of what is, that this person, right here, is me. And how could I not love myself? This is why Jesus said, love your enemies. Not as a moral demand, not as something you do to earn points in heaven, but as a description of reality. Your enemy is you. The person who hurt you is you. The person you despise is you, and loving them is not excusing what they did. It's not pretending they didn't cause harm. It's recognizing that they, like you, are consciousness in a mask, playing a role, acting out a script, and at some level, deeper than the personality, they're doing exactly what they came here to do, what they need to do, what consciousness needs to experience through them, and you, in your role, might need to set boundaries, might need to walk away, might even need to stop them from causing further harm, but you can do all of that without hatred, without the poison of believing they're fundamentally evil, fundamentally separate, fundamentally other, because they're not. They're you, just lost in the game, just so immersed in the character that they've forgotten who they really are, and maybe your role is to help them remember, or maybe your role is to be the villain in their story, the obstacle they need to overcome. Either way, it's all the one consciousness, exploring itself, knowing itself, loving itself, even through conflict, even through pain. This is the ultimate meaning of unconditional love. Not that you accept everything everyone does, but that you recognize everyone as yourself, and you treat them accordingly. Now let's address the question of evil. Because if everyone is you, if everyone is consciousness playing a role, then what about truly terrible acts? What about genocide, torture, rape, murder? How can these be part of some cosmic exploration? How can consciousness choose to experience these things? This is the hardest question, and there's no easy answer. But consider this: if consciousness is infinite, if it's exploring every possible perspective, then that includes the dark ones, the cruel ones, the ones that cause immense suffering, not because consciousness is evil, but because to know itself fully, consciousness must experience everything, light and dark, pleasure and pain, creation and destruction, love and hatred. And yes, that means that at some level, deeper than you can currently comprehend, consciousness has chosen to experience both being the victim and being the perpetrator, both the tortured and the torturer, both the murdered and the murderer. Not in this life, maybe not in the next 1,000 lives, but eventually. Because if consciousness is truly exploring all perspectives, then no perspective can be left out. And this doesn't make the suffering okay. It doesn't justify it. It doesn't mean you should accept it or ignore it. If you see someone being harmed, you stop it if you can. You protect the vulnerable. You stand against cruelty, because that's your role in this particular moment. That's how consciousness is expressing itself through you. But it does mean that ultimately, no one is left out. No one is abandoned. No one is lost forever in darkness, because everyone is you. And you will eventually experience all of it, all the joy and all the suffering, all the love and all the hatred. And when you've experienced all of it, when you've been every person who has ever lived, then you'll understand, not intellectually, but directly, completely. And the understanding will be so vast, so total, that even the worst moments will be seen as part of the whole, part of the exploration, part of the infinite consciousness knowing itself. This might sound cold, it might sound like it minimizes suffering, but it doesn't. If anything, it makes suffering more meaningful, because it means that every moment of pain, every injustice, every tragedy is felt by consciousness, is felt by you. You are the child starving, you are the refugee fleeing, you are the prisoner being tortured, and you are also the person who could help, who could intervene, who could change the course of events. And how you act in those moments, whether you turn away or step forward, that matters. Not because there's some external judge keeping score, but because it's you. You are creating the world you will experience. The kindness you show is kindness you show to yourself. The cruelty you inflict is cruelty you inflict on yourself. And at some point, in some life, you will be on the receiving end of both. So the question is not, does suffering matter? The question is, what kind of universe do you want to create? And you answer that question with every choice you make, every moment you decide whether to act from love or from fear, from recognition or from separation, from awareness or from unconsciousness. The universe you experience is the universe you're building, right now, with every thought, every word, every action. So what does it mean to live wisely in a world you now know is an illusion? It means you take it seriously without taking it too seriously. You engage fully while remembering it's a game. You love completely while knowing that everyone is you. You work hard while understanding that your worth doesn't depend on success. You face challenges while recognizing that they're opportunities. You encounter pain while knowing that you are not the pain. You experience joy while not clinging to it. You live as if this moment is all there is, because in a sense it is. And you live as if there's something beyond this moment, because there is. The paradox is the point. The ability to hold both perspectives at once, to be fully human while knowing you're more than human, that's the art of awakening. That's what the sages and mystics have been teaching for millennia. Not that you should transcend the world, but that you should be fully in it while knowing what it is. An interface, a headset, a game played by infinite consciousness to know itself. And you are that consciousness. You've always been that consciousness. You just forgot for a while. And that's okay. The forgetting was part of the plan. Because without forgetting, there's no journey, no discovery, no awakening. You have to lose yourself to find yourself. You have to become lost in the character to remember you're the player. And maybe that's where you are right now. Starting to remember, starting to see through the interface, starting to recognize that the world you've taken for granted your entire life is far stranger and more wonderful than you ever imagined. So what happens from here? That's up to you. You can dismiss all of this. You can say it's interesting philosophy, but ultimately unprovable, and go back to living as if the interface is reality. And that's fine. That's a valid choice. The game continues either way. Or you can take it seriously. You can start to examine your own experience. You can test these ideas. You can sit in a meditation and watch your thoughts arise and pass. You can ask yourself, who is aware of these thoughts? Who is experiencing this moment? You can start to notice the space between thoughts, the awareness that's always here, always watching, always present. You can begin to recognize that the voice in your head, the one that's always commenting, judging, planning, worrying, that's not you. That's the character, and you are the one listening to the voice, the one aware of it, the consciousness behind it all. And the more you practice this, the more you'll start to see through the interface. You'll catch glimpses of what you really are. At first, just for seconds, then for longer. And gradually, the perspective will shift. You'll still have thoughts. You'll still have a body. You'll still navigate the world. But you'll do it from a different place, from awareness itself, from the recognition that you are not the character. You are the consciousness playing the character. And that consciousness is infinite, eternal, unborn, undying, free. It's always been free. You've just been too identified with the character to notice. And here's the beautiful part. You don't have to figure this out alone, because everyone you meet, whether they know it or not, whether they're awake or still lost in the dream, is you. They're here to help you remember. Sometimes by challenging you, sometimes by loving you, sometimes by reflecting back to you the parts of yourself you haven't seen yet. Every interaction is a gift, every moment is an opportunity, every person is a teacher, because they're all you, showing you different aspects of yourself, helping you wake up. And you are doing the same for them. Whether you know it or not, your presence affects everyone around you. The more awake you become, the more aware, the more present, the more it ripples out. Not because you're trying to enlighten anyone, but simply because consciousness recognizes itself. And when people are around someone who's awake, even a little bit, something in them stirs, something remembers. Oh, that's what I am. That's what I've always been. I just forgot. And the forgetting starts to lift. This is how awakening spreads, not through preaching or convincing, but through presence, through being, through living from the recognition that we are all one consciousness, exploring itself, knowing itself, loving itself, through every possible form. So here we are, at the end of this journey, except it's not really an end. It's a beginning, because now you know, or at least you've heard. You've been given a map, a pointer, a way of seeing reality that's radically different from what you were taught. The world is not what it seems. The objects you perceive are not solid, independent things. They're renderings in an interface. Your body is not who you are. It's an avatar, a character in a game. Your brain is not creating your consciousness. Your consciousness is creating the experience of a brain, and you are not separate from anyone or anything. You are the infinite consciousness that underlies all of reality, temporarily experiencing itself as this particular person in this particular time and place. And when this life ends, when the body dies, you won't disappear. You'll just take off the headset, and you'll see, finally, what you've always been, what you've always known, what you've always been searching for. Yourself, infinite, eternal, free. And maybe you'll rest for a while, and maybe you'll put on another headset, another body, another life, another perspective, because the exploration never ends. Consciousness is infinite, and there's always more to experience, more to discover, more to know, but for now, you're here, in this body, in this moment, in this life, and that's enough, more than enough. It's everything. Because this moment, right here, right now, is where consciousness is knowing itself through you, and there's nowhere else you need to be, nothing else you need to achieve, no one else you need to become. You are already complete, already whole, already home. You've just been wearing a headset that made you forget. And now, maybe, you're starting to remember. So as you drift off, as you let these words fade into the background, and sleep begins to pull you under, know this. The world will be waiting for you in the morning. The interface will still be there. The game will continue, but you'll see it differently now, even if just a little, even if just for moments. You'll catch glimpses of what lies beneath. You'll recognize the rendering for what it is. You'll remember that you are not the character, you are the player, you are the consciousness, you are the infinite awareness that cannot be born and cannot die. And you are exactly where you need to be, playing exactly the role you came here to play, exploring exactly the perspective you chose to explore. And when this game ends, another will begin. Or you'll rest in the infinite. Either way, you're safe. You've always been safe. You are the safety itself, the consciousness that holds everything, the awareness that remains when all else falls away. Rest in that. Rest as that. Because that's what you are. That's what you've always been, and that's what you'll always be, forever